Hey, guess what? It's time for the BlazorPuzzle. I'm Carl Franklin from AppVNext, and that's Jeff Fritz from Microsoft. Hey, Jeff.
How do? Good to see you, Carl.
Good to see you. Why don't we skip the blah-de-blah and get right into the puzzle?
I'm a big fan of blah-de-blah, but yes, let's talk about the puzzle.
Okay. All right, so puzzle 18. What we have is a little configuration on the server with a welcome message that says welcome from the config file, right? And we simply want to show it, that string, in the WebAssembly application, right?
Yeah.
And so we have some code that kind of works, but let's just take a look. We're pulling it out of configuration. Welcome message.
And this could be some other string that you might use for connecting to other services.
Now watch. Oh, it goes away. Yes, Jeff, you're right. This could be a string connecting to other services. Obviously, we wouldn't want to show that. But the question is, what if there are some things that we want to show in a config file we don't want to necessarily ship down to the client? And how can you do that? Right. So obviously this didn't work. It was there for a second and then it went away. And the reason is that we have pre-rendering on. And in Blazor web applications in .NET 8, a WebAssembly with the interactivity location set to global, right? The first page is pre-rendered. So you can't even use it until that first render happens. You'll try pressing a button and nothing will happen. That's just the way it works. Now you could turn pre-rendering off, right, Jeff?
Yeah, you turn pre-rendering off, but you lose that performance bump. You lose that SEO advantage that you had, right? The ability to render and put content either on search engines or on social media sites where there's a crawler that might be coming by to grab an image or some information to display about your pages.
Exactly. So in this case, we want to leave pre-rendering on, but we want to figure out a way to make this work. Now, obviously, it works the first time because we're running server-side and it's server-side rendered. And so then that welcome message gets pulled out of configuration and it shows. But then as soon as WebAssembly is downloaded and the first render happens, boom, it goes away because the configuration locally doesn't have welcome message. Now, there's several ways to do this, right, Jeff?
Yeah, there's a couple different formats that we can put this in, but I think you're going to land on pretty much the crux of the solution here.
Yeah. So the way I'm going to do it is to go to the server and implement just a minimal API endpoint, and that's it. So when we call config, with an HTTP client, it's going to reach into configuration and pull out welcome message and return that. Now, I could have gone to the extent of doing a complete API controller, right? I could use authentication,
yes,
authorization,
little cores,
exactly. I could use SignalR, right?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of ways I could use gRPC.
Ooh.
But essentially what you want to do is have the client call the server and say, hey, what's the value of this? And then the server can return it. And that way it's explicit. Like we're not exposing the entire configuration file. We're just pulling out this value for this key right here.
And Carl, to that point, you may want to build some sort of a DTO around this that contains just those configuration values that you do want to share with the client.
Absolutely. So obviously, we're opening up a can of worms here, but for the sake of the demo, we have a simple endpoint called config. Now, how do we call it? Well, let's go to the program file on the client, and we're going to add this. All right, so this should look familiar for anyone who did WebAssembly applications in previous versions of Blazor. They usually come with an HTTP client already configured with the host environment's base address. So having that, now I can change my home page to not inject the configuration, but inject that HTTP client. Okay, so I've injected the HTTP client. Everything else is the same, but now on after render, in that first render, that's when I want to call get string async on that HTTP client for config, and then I call status changed again, which will force a re-render, but that means the welcome message will show. Now this looks like it should work, right, Jeff?
It does, and I feel like there's one last piece that we're missing.
All right, well, let's find out what happens when we run this.
All right, let's take a look.
And
yeah, there's one thing missing here.
Yeah. Here's the error. There is no registered service of type systemnet HTTP client, even though I did register it, but I registered it on the client. And I just told you guys that in Blazor 8, everything's server-side rendered first, right?
So we need it on the server too.
So here I am in the server program CS, and I'm just going to put an HTTP client in there. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to call it. So base address is irrelevant. I'm not going to call it because on the home page, I'm waiting until first render, which doesn't happen until what? All of the WebAssembly stuff is in place.
Until we're in WebAssembly.
So let's try it again. Here we go, server-side rendered version, and then boom, there it is. So exactly the opposite of using the config file, which first got the data from the server-side rendering, and then was blank once we got to the client. There you go.
So a possible alternative that we could consider would be to set up not an I configuration or an HTTP client that we're passing into the page, but perhaps some sort of an I configuration repository object that on server side is referencing configuration directly and has an implementation there.
That is a great idea, and maybe that's a good puzzle to come.
So, Carl, it's a big solution here. Who won? Who's got the answer for us?
Today's winner is Jeremy Thomaston.
Yeah!
All right. And Jeremy Thomaston won because we picked his correct answer at random from all the correct answers that we got. And Jeremy's going to win one of these, a BlazorPuzzle mug.
Yeah.
And also one of these, a BlazorPuzzle t-shirt.
Very
coveted.
Cool.
Useless junk you can't get anywhere else. So let's jump into the next puzzle, shall we?
Puzzle 19. Here we go.
All right, Jeff, so what do we got here?
So this is a pretty common request that we hear from folks that customers run into. Hey, I've got a page that's nicely formatted. It's got maybe a dashboard material on it. It's got some material that I want to turn into a report. Maybe I want to give you just a print view of it that has just that content on it. Or maybe I want to send that HTML over to some sort of PDF renderer so it turns it into a nicely formatted page. Well, back in MVC and Razor Pages, we had a layout entry that was a directive at the top of the page that we could specify, and we could say, set layout to null, and it would format and look nicely for us with just the HTML that we specified.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do that with Blazor here, and it didn't quite work right. So I took the weather page that we get by default here, and it's got our table on it that nicely renders a set of information. And to recreate this scenario, I just copied and pasted it into another page there called report.razor.
Okay.
Now, it answers on /report, and it has all the exact same content. I put a link to it in the navbar on the side, but what I want to do is I want to put on line 2, I took the stream rendering out there also.
Oh, yeah,
but
I see that.
On line 2, I want to say at layout null or empty string.
Something like that.
Yeah, right. So that we can say this is the only content that I want rendered on the page, so it forgets the nav bar and the footer and all that other stuff that's added in main layout.
Right. And the reason main layout is used is because if you look in routes, we're specifying that we want main layout to be part of every page, every routable page.
Yeah. So, all right, when we try to run the application now.
All right. And again, layout null is what you suggested we do here.
And that feels like the way I used to do it back in MVC and Razor Pages.
Yeah.
But it's grouchy.
And it says, layout attribute does not contain a constructor that takes 2 arguments.
And it expects
the layout directive expects a type name.
So I can't even put empty string there. So how do I do this? I want to drop what's in the layout. So
layout null, layout nothing.
Yeah.
layout.
Come on, man.
This ain't working.
Viewers out there, can you help me out? What do I do here so that I can format my report with just this content on the screen?
That's right. And if you think you know the answer, don't post it on social media, but instead send it to Jeff and me at BlazorPuzzle@appvnext.com with the subject puzzle number 19. And we will check them all out, get all the winners together, get all the right answers together, pick a winner.
Oh, yeah.
It might be you, but you got to submit.
But please tell your friends, tell your families about the Blazor puzzle. We want to see more folks talking about the various puzzles that we've been working through and learning from some of the various techniques and tricks that we've been showing you here on the podcast.
Absolutely. And by the way, I have a new Blazor train that is coming out tomorrow after this is published, but it should be there by now. If you go to BlazorTrain.com, basically I revisited App State in Blazor for .NET 8.
Very cool.
And that's it. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, guys.
Take care, friends.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out BlazorTrain.com and the .NETShow.com for more great content.